The city lights flickered as Emily stepped into the quiet restaurant, its soft hum offering a brief escape from the harsh realities of her life. She moved behind the counter, adjusting her apron as she began her shift. The night ahead was long and uneventful until he walked in, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed to belong to someone else. Ethan Montgomery was the kind of man who commanded attention without uttering a single word. The billionaire heir to one of the largest shipping empires in the world, yet tonight, he didn't seem like the man who owned half the city. Tonight, he was just a man with a plan. He sat at the far corner, glancing around the room as though searching for something or someone. As Emily approached with the evening specials, their eyes met. His gaze was piercing, calculating, like he had already figured out everything about her. Emily smiled politely, feeling the heat of his stare, but she said nothing. "You're new here," Ethan remarked casually, his voice smooth and confident. "I don't recall seeing you before." "I just started last week," Emily replied, keeping her tone professional. "How can I help you tonight?" He leaned back in his seat, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. The ambience of the restaurant seemed to change with his every move, as though the air itself was charged with the weight of his presence. "I need a favor," he said, his tone shifting. It was no longer a casual conversation. There was something more, something urgent. "I'm in a bit of a bind. I need someone to play a role that could change everything." Emily's curiosity piqued, but she didn't show it. "What kind of role?" "A fiancé," he replied, his eyes locking with hers, and the weight of his words landed between them like a challenge. "I need a temporary fiancé for a family event to secure my inheritance." The air thickened with his words, and Emily felt a flicker of hesitation. She knew what he was asking. This wasn't about love. This wasn't even about chemistry. This was business. Still, the idea of becoming entangled in his world, his billion-dollar world, was tempting. But she was no stranger to the harsh realities of life. His gaze never wavered. "I'll make it worth your while," he continued, his voice steady, almost soothing. "You'll get what you need, and I'll get what I need. We both walk away winners." Emily took a breath, steadying herself. She couldn't afford to make hasty decisions, but the offer lingered in the back of her mind. A chance to break free from the mundane. A chance to escape her financial troubles. But before she could speak, he added one last piece. "And no matter what happens," he said, leaning in slightly, "we keep this professional. There will be no strings attached." The promise was clear, but Emily couldn't shake the nagging thought. What if this wasn't just business? What if, for once, she was stepping into something that could change everything? She stood in silence, weighing her options, before meeting his gaze again. "I'll do it." Emily walked into the luxurious penthouse, her nerves almost as stiff as the marble floors beneath her feet. Ethan had been true to his word, arranging everything to make sure she was settled comfortably in his world, yet nothing about this felt real. She was an outsider, a prop in someone else's drama. The towering windows stretched across the entire wall, offering a view of the city skyline that made her stomach churn. Ethan had already prepared a room for her, a spacious suite, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a glass box. Beautiful, but completely exposed. "You'll have everything you need here," Ethan had said earlier, his voice smooth and reassuring, yet there was an edge to it. "It's all part of the deal. Just stick to the script, and you'll be out of here in no time." It felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It was a contract, one she had signed without truly understanding the cost. She tried to push aside her guilt as she unpacked her things, organizing her life as if this strange arrangement were normal. The next morning, Ethan's driver took her to the family estate. It was a sprawling mansion, located in the wealthiest part of the city, with manicured gardens and an air of cold, aristocratic history. The staff greeted her with stiff politeness, as if they had done this 1,000 times before, welcoming yet wary. Inside, she met Ethan's grandmother, a sharp-eyed woman who made no effort to hide her judgment. The entire family seemed to carry a quiet authority, like their world was built on rules no one could break. Emily was nothing but a pawn in their game. But the more she saw of Ethan, the more confusing it became. There was something in the way he spoke to her, something in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, that hinted at a growing connection. Was it real? Or was it just part of the act? At the family dinner that night, the room was filled with chatter and clinking silverware, But all Emily could focus on was Ethan's calm demeanor, how he seamlessly navigated through the evening, his every word calculated. He played the part of the charming billionaire effortlessly, but when their eyes met across the table, Emily saw something else, something genuine. She excused herself from the table early, needing a moment alone to process everything. The weight of it all, the contract, the money, the expectations, felt suffocating. In the quiet of the hallway, she took a deep breath, trying to center herself. Just then, Ethan appeared, stepping out from the shadows with a look of quiet understanding on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than she expected. Emily nodded, unsure of how to explain the chaos inside her. "I just need time to adjust." Ethan's expression softened, but there was a hint of something more behind his eyes. "I know this isn't easy, but you're not alone in this. I promised you this wouldn't be more than a business arrangement." And that's still true. But as Emily looked into his eyes, she realized there was more to this than just business. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one struggling to separate the real from the fake. The next few days passed in a blur of polite conversation and carefully maintained facades. Emily had already learned that she was an outsider in Ethan's world, a pawn in a game much bigger than herself. The mansion, the glittering events, the aristocratic guests, they all felt like scenes from a movie. She was just a player in someone else's drama, and the script was written by Ethan himself. The gala was approaching, a family gathering that promised to be both lavish and tense. The entire Montgomery family would be there, along with some of Ethan's most influential business partners. It was the event Ethan had promised would solidify their agreement in front of the people who mattered. Emily was to play her part as his fiancée, a role that was no more real than a scene from a play. Ethan, however, was different than she expected. There was a cold precision in his movements, in the way he carried himself among the wealthy elite. Yet, there was something in his eyes when they were alone, a flicker of vulnerability that she hadn't anticipated. The longer she played the part, the harder it became to keep her emotions in check. The night of the gala, Emily was dressed in a stunning gown. Everything had been arranged for her, from the jewelry to the makeup. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the girl who had been scrubbing dishes just weeks before. She had been transformed, but was it worth it? Her heart was still heavy with the weight of the situation. Ethan greeted her at the door, his sharp suit a stark contrast to her soft, flowing dress. He looked every bit the billionaire, the heir to a legacy, the future of a dynasty. But there was something else in his gaze, something that suggested a deeper conflict. He held out his arm, offering her a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice low, yet full of meaning. "Let's make sure they all believe it." Emily gave him a tentative smile, but the words felt hollow. She nodded and took his arm, following him into the crowded ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the quiet murmur of business deals being discussed in hushed tones. The world she had stepped into felt like a dream, a place where appearances mattered more than truth, and everyone wore masks to hide their true selves. As they entered the room, the crowd parted, and all eyes were immediately on them. Ethan, the powerful billionaire, with his beautiful fiancée by his side. The moment was choreographed perfectly, just as planned. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a part she hadn't auditioned for, and the script was starting to feel like a cage. Throughout the evening, Emily played her role, laughing at the right moments, offering polite nods to the family and guests who approached them. But her mind was elsewhere, lost in the quiet moments when Ethan's eyes lingered on her a little too long, or when his voice softened in private, as if speaking to her not as a business partner, but as something more. When the gala finally came to an end, the applause faded, and the guests began to leave. Emily found herself alone in a corner of the ballroom, away from the throng. Ethan found her there, standing by a window that overlooked the city. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice a little more genuine than before. He stood next to her, looking out over the city lights. "They bought it. Everything we planned is falling into place." Emily nodded but didn't reply. She was still trying to process it all, trying to figure out where she stood in this world of power, wealth, and deceit. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Emily, I want you to know something. Despite everything, I'm grateful for you. You've helped me more than you realize." His words caught her off guard. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was a man who seemed as trapped by the expectations of his family as she was by the contract they had signed. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure of what else to say. Ethan's eyes softened for a moment before he looked away. "We both have our roles to play," he said quietly. "But somewhere along the way, I think we've started to forget which ones are real." As the night drew to a close, Emily couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The days that followed the gala felt like a blur, as if time was slipping through Emily's fingers. Ethan had kept his distance, their interactions now more formal, more transactional. Every time their paths crossed, she couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere felt between them. She had started to wonder if this was how things were always going to be, an arrangement, nothing more. But despite the coldness that hung in the air, there were moments, brief as they were, when Ethan let his guard down. The first time was on a rainy evening, when they were both stuck at the penthouse due to a sudden storm. They had sat in silence at first, each of them preoccupied with their own thoughts. Emily had been staring out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, when Ethan broke the silence. "You know," he started, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I've never been good at this, at pretending everything is fine, at keeping up appearances. But you've made it seem effortless." His words caught her off guard, and she looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was a flicker of vulnerability, something she hadn't expected from a man like him. "I'm not pretending," she replied quietly. "This is all real for me. Every moment. The stakes, the decisions, they're all real." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "And what if the stakes change? What if everything we've set in motion becomes something more than just a deal?" Emily didn't know how to answer him. She had spent so much of her life surviving, just getting by. The idea that this could be anything more than a contract was terrifying. But there was something in Ethan's eyes, something that made her question whether she had been wrong to dismiss the possibility of something real between them. The next few days were filled with gala preparations, business meetings, and endless conversations with people who seemed to only care about money and status. Emily had learned to navigate the social minefield with the precision of a trained diplomat, but every time she looked at Ethan, it was like she saw a different man than the one she had first met. The morning of the family event, Ethan was different. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken. As they prepared to leave, he caught her arm gently, pulling her aside. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying something deeper, "you don't have to do this. We could walk away, pretend none of this ever happened." But Emily knew better. She had already made her choice. She couldn't back out now, not when everything had already been set into motion. But as they stepped into the car, heading toward the event, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Underscore their lives were about to be tested in ways they never imagined, as the line between business and emotions began to blur, threatening to unravel the very foundation they had built together. Would they make it through the storm, or would it all come crashing down? Only time would tell. The gala ended, but the questions that lingered in Emily's mind hadn't. The evening had been a success, as far as Ethan was concerned. The guests had been charmed by their engagement, and his family had accepted her presence, albeit with some quiet skepticism. But beneath the polished exterior of their social performance, there was an underlying tension, one that neither of them could shake. The days following the gala were filled with strange quietness. Ethan kept to his usual routine, buried in business meetings and decisions that shaped his empire. Emily, on the other hand, felt increasingly like a shadow in his world. There were moments when their eyes met across a room, brief moments of connection that made her question the boundaries they had set. But these moments were fleeting, quickly covered by the weight of their contract. She was still his fiancée, still playing a part, nothing more. It wasn't until a late afternoon, when the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, that things shifted again. Emily was sitting alone in the living room, lost in thought, when Ethan walked in. He had just returned from another long day of negotiations, his usual composed demeanor slipping as he dropped his briefcase on the floor. "You all right?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter than usual. His eyes, tired yet thoughtful, met hers. Emily nodded, but she could feel the uncertainty stirring in her chest. Yeah, just thinking. About everything. About us? He asked, stepping closer. The question hung in the air for a moment. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the billionaire who controlled an empire. In that moment, he was just a man who had been forced to rely on her for his own personal gain. And somehow, she had become entangled in his life in a way that made it hard to tell where the business ended and the emotions began. I don't know what to think anymore, Emily admitted. This arrangement was supposed to be simple. But now, I'm not so sure. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was never supposed to be more than a deal. But it's hard not to feel something else, isn't it? She didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. The feelings swirling inside her were complicated. She had agreed to this arrangement to get out of her financial struggle, to help her mother. But what had she signed up for in the end? Was it just the money, or was there something more? Ethan continued, his voice softer now. I know this isn't what either of us expected, but there's one thing I've learned. Sometimes, things aren't just about the deal. They're about the people you meet along the way. Emily looked at him, her heart heavy with unspoken words. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of the contract between them kept pulling her back into the reality of their situation. I just need to know, she began, her voice shaking slightly. Are you ever going to see me as more than just someone you hired to play this role? Ethan took a deep breath, his expression turning serious. I never wanted to make you feel like that. I may have hired you, but somewhere along the way, you became more than just a business arrangement to me. I don't know what this is, but I don't want to lose it. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had expected him to push her away, to remind her of the lines they had drawn. But instead, he had said something she hadn't anticipated, a confession of sorts. In that moment, she realized they were both playing a dangerous game, one where the stakes were much higher than either of them had imagined. But it was too late to back out now. They had crossed a line, and no matter how hard they tried to pretend it was just business, the truth was clear. What had started as a contract was evolving into something neither of them could control. And as the night grew darker, they both knew that the real test was just beginning. The days after the gala felt like they passed in slow motion. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between her and Ethan. It was subtle, hidden in the way he would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, or the moments when their conversations lingered just a little too long. Every now and then, she'd catch him watching her with a look that seemed to say more than just the business agreement they had signed. But no matter how much she wanted to believe that there was something real between them, the weight of their contract always hung in the air. The promise they had made to each other, to keep this relationship professional, to never let it become more than a business arrangement, was a constant reminder of the boundaries they had set. But as the days passed, those boundaries seemed to blur, and Emily found herself questioning everything. One evening, as she sat in the penthouse, the sound of Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway. He walked into the living room, his face tense, his usually composed demeanor now laced with something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. I need to talk to you, Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. Emily set down the book she had been reading, her heart skipping a beat. What's wrong? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly before coming to a stop in front of her. I'm starting to think that this arrangement was a mistake. I can't keep pretending that it's just a business deal. There's too much between us now. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan. No, listen, he interrupted, turning to face her fully. I've been trying to keep my distance, but every time I look at you, I can't help but feel something more. I know I promised this would be just business, but it's not. It's not for me. And I don't want you to feel trapped in something that isn't real. Emily stood, her mind racing. The words he was saying were exactly what she had feared. The lines between them were no longer clear, and now he was telling her that everything they had built was falling apart. But we agreed, she said, her voice shaky. We agreed this was just a contract. You needed someone to pretend, and I know what we agreed on, Ethan said, cutting her off. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living this lie. Not when everything inside of me says that what we have is more than just a deal. He stepped closer to her, and Emily felt the air between them grow heavier. His eyes were searching hers, as if trying to find the words he couldn't say. She could see it now. The vulnerability, the fear, the uncertainty. He wasn't just the billionaire anymore. He was a man who had allowed someone into his life, someone who was changing everything. You don't have to say anything, Ethan said quietly. But I need to. Know if you feel the same way. If you're starting to see me the way I'm starting to see you. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had told herself this was just a contract, that she wouldn't get attached, that she wouldn't fall for him. But as she looked at him now, standing there with raw honesty in his eyes, she realized that she had already crossed that line. I don't know what I feel anymore, she whispered. I thought I knew what this was. But now, I don't know what I'm supposed to believe. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but insistent. You don't have to know right now, but I want you to know that whatever happens next, it won't just be a contract. I won't let it be. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly believe that something real might be waiting for them. But as they stood there, together yet uncertain, she knew that their journey was just beginning. The hardest part was still to come. The following days were marked by a sense of tension that neither Emily nor Ethan could shake. As the gala and family events passed, the facade they had carefully built began to crumble. The weight of their unspoken feelings, tugging at the edges of their carefully constructed agreement, was becoming too much to ignore. Ethan remained distant, but there was a flicker in his eyes whenever their paths crossed. He seemed to be struggling with something he hadn't yet shared with her. The silence between them grew louder, filled with the unsaid things that neither of them was ready to face. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan called Emily into his office. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable strain in his words. Emily, he began, his eyes meeting hers, I need you to listen carefully. This arrangement, it's not just a business deal anymore. It's not something I can ignore. It's not just a contract between us. And I think you feel it too. Her heart skipped a beat as she processed his words. She had known it was coming, had known they couldn't pretend forever, but hearing it from him made it all too real. The boundaries they had set, no emotions, no personal attachment, were no longer enough to keep the growing tension at bay. I can't just keep pretending that this is what we agreed on. Ethan continued, his voice softer now. I thought I could, but I can't. Not anymore. This is more complicated than I ever imagined. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had tried to keep things simple, to stay detached, but now she realized that she had allowed herself to care. She had let herself believe that there could be more between them, even if it was just a fleeting fantasy. Are you saying we just end this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan shook his head, his expression conflicted. No, I don't want to end it. I want to find a way forward. But I need to know if you're with me. If you feel the same way. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything they had shared and everything they hadn't. Emily's heart raced as she stared at him, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. This wasn't just about contracts or business anymore. It was about something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. I don't know what I feel, she admitted, her voice breaking. I thought I knew. But now, I can't pretend anymore either. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Then we figure it out. Together. No more pretending. No more contracts. Just us. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like they were both standing on the edge of something they couldn't control. The uncertainty, the fear of what this could mean, was overwhelming. But for the first time, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a contract. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. Ethan's words echoed in Emily's mind long after their conversation had ended. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything between them had shifted. It was no longer just about a contract or a business deal. The lines between what was real and what was fabricated had blurred, and neither of them knew how to navigate it. Despite the weight of the situation, Emily still felt herself drawn to him, to his honesty in admitting the struggle he was facing. But as much as she wanted to let herself believe in the possibility of something real, the consequences of their arrangement loomed large. Days later, as the tension between them built, a phone call shattered the fragile calm they had both tried to maintain. It was from Ethan's lawyer, delivering news that would change everything. Emily, I need you to come to the office. We need to discuss the next steps, Ethan said, his voice strained. With a sinking feeling, Emily agreed. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting behind a desk stacked with papers. His expression was grave, his posture rigid. It was clear that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "Emily, there's something you need to know," Ethan began, his voice low. "The family is pressuring me to finalize everything, quickly. They don't see us as anything but a transaction. The moment they find out we've crossed the line, it could jeopardize everything." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "You're talking about us?" "Yes," he admitted, his gaze intense. "I care about you, but they don't. And I can't afford to lose my position. You're in danger now, too." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She had known the stakes were high, but hearing it out loud made everything feel too real, too overwhelming. "I don't want to be a part of this anymore, Ethan," Emily said, her voice shaking with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I can't keep living in this false reality. You and we're not just pretending anymore, are we?" Ethan's face softened, and he stood up, walking around the desk to stand before her. He reached for her hands, his grip firm but gentle. "No, we're not just pretending," he said quietly. "But if we're going to do this, we need to make a choice. Together." His words lingered in the space between them, and for the first time, Emily could see that the choice wasn't just about business. It was about them, their future, and the risk of losing everything they had started to build, however fragile it might be. The choice was clear now. They had to decide whether to stay within the confines of the arrangement or to face the consequences of choosing something real, something that could break everything apart. As the silence stretched between them, Emily realized that this moment, the moment where everything changed, was just the beginning. They had crossed the point of no return, and now they had to face what came next. The days after their conversation were filled with uncertainty. The tension between Emily and Ethan had reached a boiling point, and yet neither of them knew how to move forward. They had crossed a line, one they couldn't erase, no matter how much they tried to ignore it. Their feelings for each other had become undeniable, but the reality of their situation was too complicated to ignore. It wasn't until the morning of the family meeting that everything finally came to a head. Ethan had received a call from his lawyer earlier in the day. The family was pressing for an answer, whether he would stick to the arrangement or walk away from everything he had worked for. The pressure was suffocating, and for the first time, Emily saw the true weight of the world Ethan carried on his shoulders. As they sat together in his office, the silence between them was almost unbearable. Ethan looked at her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "I've thought about this a lot," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "The truth is, this arrangement was never just about securing my inheritance. It was about me trying to hold on to control. I've spent so long building this empire, and I was afraid of losing it. But what I'm realizing now is that what I've been holding on to isn't worth it if it means losing you." Emily's heart fluttered, but her doubts still lingered. "Ethan, this isn't just about us," she said quietly. "It's about everything, the family, the business. There's too much at stake." "I know," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I can't keep living a life where I have everything and yet feel so empty. I don't want this to just be a business deal. I want it to be real." In that moment, something shifted between them. The walls they had both built to protect themselves started to crumble. They had been playing roles. Ethan, the billionaire heir. Emily, the hired fiancée. But now, they were just two people who had come to realize that their feelings for each other could no longer be ignored. The choice was no longer about contracts or family obligations. It was about what they wanted for their future, together or apart. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'm asking you to choose me," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "No more pretending. No more contracts." Emily looked at him, her heart racing as she considered everything that had led them here. She had come so far from the life she had known, but what mattered now was not where she had come from. It was where she was going. "I choose you, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I choose us." For the first time, they were not bound by a contract or family expectations. They were free to write their own story, one that wasn't dictated by anyone else's rules. And as they stood together, ready to face whatever came next, they knew that their journey was only just beginning.